Spark project with the University of Bedfordshire since 2018, the same. And I present Ukrainian Engineering-Pedagogics Academy. I can see my colleague Olena is here. Hi, Lena. And my colleagues from University of Bedfordshire, Jan May, Jan Quinn, and our secret speaker for today. So what about our project? I am a member of Creative Spark team. And in our project, our project called Create Creative Entrepreneurs, and friendly environment for entrepreneurs in creative industries, and aimed to give them any help they need in their businesses and their work. And we established, last year, we established some center of creative entrepreneurship development. I'm sorry, and this center is located in Ukrainian Engineering-Pedagogics Academy in Kharkiv. So if you are interested in creative industries, in startups, in maybe some questions related to these topics, we will wait you in our center and give you any help we can. And let me say 2 words about our today's activity. I think maybe several months ago, we decided with Paul to start some Kharkiv Marathon, Kharkiv Startup Marathon 2020. And this event must be a great event in Kharkiv, dedicated to startup ecosystem with great speakers, with British speakers, and so on and so on. But due to the quarantine, we transformed the format of this event, and now we started the set of webinars from British entrepreneurs and academics and scientists and businessmen. And the main topic is, it's our common event with Paul, and the main topic is creative industries, startup systems, entrepreneurs. And let me say 2 words about main issues we will talk about today. The first we will talk will be what needs to become an entrepreneur. Then we will talk about entrepreneurs' character trails and why these are important, and how entrepreneurs make decisions and manage their businesses. And the main issue is who will be our secret speaker. It's our surprise. Let me introduce him. So I have the whole page with his awareness, with his performances. So now we start our webinar with Emeritus Professor of Entrepreneurship at the University of Bedfordshire, Dean of the Business School and Pro-Vice Chancellor till 2015, Academic Accountant and Entrepreneur, Professor of Small Business at Cranfield School of Management, Director of 3i European Enterprise Research Center, President of ISB, visiting professor at Harvard Business School, USA, and Open University Business School, the United Kingdom. The person who launched the English Graduate Enterprise Program and the Small Business Program, author more than 30 books and hundreds of articles and research reports. So, Paul Burns. Paul, please.
Well, yeah, I mean, what an introduction. I mean, all I can say is I'm very old. I am retired, and that's why I've done quite a few things. But let me just, I mean, before I start, let me just get a bit of that in perspective, because I'm actually, first of all, I want to say I'm really annoyed because I'm not in Ukraine with you. I first went over to Ukraine about 25 years ago when Ukraine got its independence, and people were just so very friendly and nice to me. And it would have been lovely to come over back to the Ukraine to give this talk. But these are strange times. But I want to just say a little bit about my background, because I got to where I am now, which is retired, in a quite circuitous and haphazard and almost accidental way. When I left university, I didn't know what to do. So I went to become an accountant, and I went to work for an American firm of accountants for the big reason that they offered me £50 a year more than anybody else. And then, quite by chance, I was put into what they called their general practice division, which dealt with smaller businesses. But actually, they didn't just deal with smaller businesses, they dealt with entrepreneurial businesses. And so whilst all my other friends who were becoming accountants with me were bored working for anonymous big companies doing audits and things like that, I got to work with these really interesting people called entrepreneurs. And I mean, that decided me that really I wasn't going to stay being an accountant. What I was going to do was go out into the world of business. But I thought I'd go and get a master's, an MBA qualification at the business school first, because my first degree wasn't in business. I went to Warwick University Business School. And what happened there was they sort of said, would you like to apply for a post coming up? Which I did, and I got. And I thought, well, this was wonderful. In those days, lecturers only worked half the year. So we had half a year to think deep thoughts and do other things like go on holiday. But I did enjoy it, but I was a very junior member of staff. But if you think about it, this was back in the 1970s, and all of the business schools were teaching big business things. And I was literally the only person in the business school who knew anything about entrepreneurship, who knew anything about smaller businesses. So I got to be the expert in the business school, the only person, in fact, who knew anything about entrepreneurship. And in that was wonderful, that was great. And that got me my first chair, my first professorship at Cranfield. There I ran a research center, which was funded research center for venture capitalist company 3i. But I got to not only research small business and entrepreneurs, I got to write about them, I got to teach them and train them. But you know, if you're a teacher, people often say those people who can't do it, they teach, don't they? They always teach. And so over a drink in the bar, an entrepreneur would say to me, well, if you know so much about entrepreneurship, Paul, why don't you do it? And after 10 years at Cranfield, this sort of got to me. And I thought, why not? So I decided to quit. Now, nobody really in their right mind would resign from a business school and set up their own business, but I sort of did it. And for 5 years, ran my own business. And I've got to tell you, I hated it. Now, I shouldn't say that maybe, because what I found out was that a lot of the things that you read about were true, but actually the big thing that worried me was the stress. You either had too much business, so you couldn't cope, or too little business, so you were looking around for more business. I had about a dozen people working in the company. It was quite a small company, but the last person who got paid was myself. So, you know, if we had a small number of very large clients, lots of money coming in, but it came in quite irregularly. So my bank balance went up and down and up and down. And at the end of the day, I found this very stressful. And I realized how risk averse I really was. So at the end of the day, I thought, Paul, you've learned a lot, but you're actually not enjoying things here. So then I decided to switch again. So I'd been an accountant, I'd been a straightforward researcher, lecturer, academic. I'd then been an entrepreneur myself. I decided to come back into the academic world this time, but managing academics. So I took the role of the dean at the business school at the University of Bedfordshire. And that was quite stressful as well. But I realized then, and I knew actually an awful lot, not just about the theory of entrepreneurship, but also what it meant in practice. And I found I really had a strong need, really was a need to write about it, because that's when I really started writing a lot of books. And I hope I'm able to blend that practice and that theory with a little bit of good judgment, which is about the only thing you get as you get older. You know, your judgment does improve. Nothing else does. But that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about entrepreneurs. I'm going to talk about how they think, how they're formed. And I've got a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation. I've got to tell you that I've never done this on a webinar before, so I'm highly relying on Paul, who introduced himself to you at the very beginning, to sort me out if I get a problem here. And so I'm going to go into a PowerPoint presentation here, which I hope you will see. So if Paul can just confirm that he sees that.
Yeah, we see the presentation.
Right, first thing, guys, I want you to tell me, can you spot an entrepreneur? I want to know how many entrepreneurs you think are in this bunch of fictitious characters. So, how many people, Paul, can you help me here? How many people think there are 5 entrepreneurs?
Yeah, guys, can you please put the number of entrepreneurs that you see on the picture from the presentation? 1, 2, 3, 5, so etc.
I think it's 4 persons.
Can you please write it in the chat? Yeah. So, we see 5, 2, 3, 5, 4, 3. So we have very various answers.
Well, I guess you recognize at least a couple of people here.
Yeah.
This person, Jobs. This person, Richard Branson. Anybody else you recognize?
I think the first person is Mark Zuckerberg, yeah?
No.
Okay.
That's Simon Cowell. Do you know Simon Cowell at all? He is a millionaire, he is an entrepreneur, he manages pop groups. And in the UK, he was responsible for a number of television programs. Probably the most famous one was The X Factor. So it's a talent show. Now, as far as I know, these 2 characters are virtual characters from The Simpsons. And not real. They may, I think, in one case be entrepreneurial, but I think this guy is a bit of a techie, but they're not real entrepreneurs, and they're certainly not real millionaires. So 3 of our people are, and they're very different. While Stephen Jobs is he's basically involved in technical innovation, Richard Branson is responsible for the Virgin logo, the Virgin brand, and he's more sort of, well, he's anything actually, anything from telephones to aeroplanes. Simon Cowell, as I said, is entertainment. So you can make your money, you can become a millionaire entrepreneur doing just about anything. And they're really not terribly recognizable unless you actually get to look at them. And I think what you need to do, let me just see if I'm going the right way. We're having a little bit of a problem here. I'm just going to have to go out of this a second. I seem to have frozen the screen, which is always a good sign. And we're going to go into a different screen, which should be easier to navigate through. Paul, can you see that?
Yeah, we see the screen.
Yeah.
Oh, it's good right now, yeah.
Okay. Go back to the other one just to see if I can get it to work. No, I can't get it to work. We'll try again. One last time. My screen is frozen. Any suggestions, Paul? Any suggestions?
It's a good question.
No?
No.
Okay. Let's go back and see if I can get it back.
It's probably something with permissions over your screen share.
Okay. So, what do you need to be an entrepreneur? You need a good business idea, but actually for many people, this is a big stumbling block. It really is. I can't find a business idea that's worth pursuing. But actually, once they get into it, it's pretty easy to find a good business idea. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of business ideas out there. And there are techniques, there are methods that you can use to try to home in on business opportunities where you are. And I've sat with a class of MBA students, and within a space of an hour, we've managed to come up with a good 100 business opportunities. There are lots of business ideas out there and lots of business opportunities that people can pursue very easily if they have the right skills. And that is an issue because you really do have to know a little bit about business, a little bit about, if you like, not just the theory of business, but also the practicalities of business, how it actually works. There's a lot of good practice out there, and a little bit of experience, a little bit of knowledge can go a long, long way. So you need a business idea, you need some skills, but you also need to have the character of an entrepreneur to be able to pursue that route. Because when I set up my own business, I had a business idea. I even had clients to go with it. I certainly had the skills because I'd been a professor of business for 20 years. But did I have the character that it needed to set up my own business? So let's explore that a little bit further. What do you mean by character? Well, it's about, are you entrepreneurial? But the last thing you want to do is ask your mum, your dad, your friends, because they'll all have different ideas about whether you are entrepreneurial. What does it actually mean? And what does it mean in terms of you? Do you have that character trait, those character traits? So let's just talk about the research, and let's just talk about what makes up that entrepreneurial character. Because looking at the character traits of entrepreneurs has got a long, long history. I mean, it's 30, 40, getting on to some of the research studies are nearly 50 years old. So there's a long track record of research into the character traits. And I think most people would generally accept that there are some fundamentals here. There is that strong need for autonomy, that strong need for independence. The sort of person who becomes an entrepreneur is somebody who doesn't take authority very easily. They don't like to be told what to do. They prefer to perhaps be a little bit alone. They certainly prefer to do what they want to do rather than what they've been told. So that strong need for autonomy is a fundamental element of the entrepreneurial character. There's a strong need for achievement. And notice the word need. Yes, I should stress that. It's a need for achievement. You can achieve very little, but if you have a low need for achievement, you can be very happy with that low level of achievement. But if you've got a high need for achievement, the level of achievement that you have to have is very high. So you can have a very high need for achievement and achieve quite a lot, but actually you're still unhappy. That need for achievement is something that drives entrepreneurs. They need to achieve whatever their goals that they set themselves actually are. The third element in this jigsaw puzzle is what's called an internal locus of control. Now, the easiest way to explain internal locus of control is to explain what an external locus of control is. External locus of control means that other people control you, fate, destiny. What is somehow your fate is ordained in the stars. You cannot affect it. An internal locus of control means that you believe that you can affect your destiny. Nobody else is pulling the strings. You can affect the outcome of your life through hard work, through whatever. And it's that combination of a strong need for achievement and a belief that you can control the outcomes of your action that creates a drive in the entrepreneur that is often not there with other people. So that drive is something that makes them want to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, sometimes ignoring family, sometimes to the detriment of their personal or life or health. But it's a drive towards whatever the business that they want to set up is concerned with. It's very much focused on that business and that business objective. The next element in the jigsaw puzzle is creativity and innovation. Now, they're not creative people in the artistic sense. They're creative in the sense of business innovation. They will find a way of doing, the way of making a business idea operational that is different to other people. So they will find some uniqueness, some difference that will help them make that business a success. So they're more creative, they're more innovative, but in a different way to many other people. And there are many tests of creativity, but you know, creativity is a very broad church. I mean, you've got artists on the one hand, you've got scientists on the other. You've got scientists, you've got entrepreneurs, a whole range of different people who can be creative within their own sphere of activity. And then the final element in this jigsaw puzzle is the entrepreneur's ability to live with risk and uncertainty. And this is certainly what tripped me up, because whilst entrepreneurs aren't necessarily risk takers, they are happy to live with a measure of uncertainty that many of us don't like. Uncertainty makes many people stressed. It makes me stressed. The situation with the virus makes me stressed. And that's about uncertainty. It's not necessarily about risk, but the entrepreneurs are certainly willing to take risks that, well, they're willing to make decisions that us lesser mortals would see as risky. They don't see it as risky because they're happy to live with uncertainty. Well, they're not happy, but they will live with uncertainty. They also believe that they can control the outcomes of their decision-making, their actions, and they have this strong drive coming from their need for achievement. So all of that gives more certainty that they can control the outcome of their actions. So these are the elements that go to make up the entrepreneurial character. One of the things I asked you to do was to actually undertake a psychometric test. Called the General Enterprise Tendency Test. Let me just pull this down and we'll have a chat about that. This is the test. Oh, is everybody seeing this?
Yeah, we see the web page with the test.
Okay, and I asked you to complete that earlier on. It only takes about 2, 3, 4 minutes. And bring it in with you, because some of you will be entrepreneurial, some of you will not be, but it would be interesting to have a little discussion about what that means to all of you. So, are you entrepreneurial? Did any of you got a very high score, 90% say, on this test? I'd like to hear from you.
Guys, can you please write in the chat what do you think of it? And if you have taken the test, please can you show us your results? So Rosa says, I've done the test. It's very interesting to do it. Someone says, I only got about
only 20%. It's a surprise for me. I'm sorry for this.
Someone didn't
good.
try it yet. Someone says, let me find the results.
Oh,
Arturo says 85. We have
85.
Yeah, yeah.
Arturo,
76.
About 76, yeah.
Is it, Paul, is it possible to turn Arturus's microphone on so that we can hear from him?
Yeah, I can unmute myself. Hello.
Okay, Arturus, tell us a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about the test. Did you think it actually described you accurately? Are you entrepreneurial?
Pretty much. Yeah, I would say it's pretty accurate. I used to have my own business, then sold. Now I'm a managing director at an IT company. So I'd say it's pretty closely identified some of the areas. Not 100%, of course, but yeah, when I read through.
Well, no test is ever going to be 100%.
Yeah, it doesn't happen.
And there's always, the problem with any test is you've got to, well, actually, I believe with psychometric tests, you've got to go with your heart and not your head. So you react.
Yeah, you don't think. There were a couple of questions, how long do you think when you when you do something? Yeah, so I think that these tests are the way, because the longer you think, then you outthink the tests. So it's similar to DISC and different psychological profiling tools that the more you think on the questions, then the more inaccuracy you're gonna get at the end.
Arturus, what was your score for need for achievement?
Need for achievement. I don't recall. So from so my lowest one was for it was something about the control. So
locus of control.
Mm-hmm. So the highest was on the creativity. I had 100%. The rest ones was 90 and 65% was on the control. So that put my score to 85.
Okay, you're only going to have about 5 or 6 at most questions on each of these elements. So it's easy to misinterpret just one question and your score goes down, well, significantly. But it's interesting. Let me just run through a couple of these things. Your lowest score was internal locus of control. Now, internal locus of control is an interesting one because it's a good character trait for entrepreneurs, but it can also be a bad character trait for entrepreneurs. Because people who've got a high internal locus of control not only believe in their own ability to control their fate, they also believe in their own ability to control other people. So they can be quite controlling and manipulative in that sense. And if you combine that with a strong drive that comes from that need for achievement, you can start to see why people like Steve Jobs was often called very bullying when it came to dealing with employees. He got very, well, he just impatient that people could not do the things that he expected them to do as quickly as he expected them to do it. So it's probably a good thing that your internal locus of control is a little lower.
Yeah.
So
I say that I'm not the toughest manager, that out there. That's for sure.
You're not the.
I'm not the toughest manager, out there. That's for sure. So.
Okay. Did anyone get a high score? Let's have a look. Anybody coming up here?
Rosa got 83%.
Rosa, where's Rosa?
Here.
Hi. Did this test accurately describe you?
Yeah, very well. I got surprised.
And which was your lowest score?
My lowest score was in autonomy.
Autonomy?
Yeah.
Now that's another interesting one.
I have low need for autonomy, yeah.
Can I ask you what you do at the moment?
I'm senior lecturer at a university and I manage a research team.
So, you manage a research team. Now that's interesting again, because I would suggest to you that if you manage a group of people, your need for autonomy is quite low. And I'll tell you why that is. This came to me about 10, 15 years ago. I've used this test for many years with MBA students because it gets them to think about themselves and whether entrepreneurship is the thing for them to do. But I once got a class of entrepreneurs. So they're all MBA entrepreneurs, where they were studying for their MBA. And I got them to do the test. And all of them got a low score, relatively low score, an average score for this need for independence, need for autonomy. And I thought, well, why is that? This can't be, because on the one hand, they're all entrepreneurs, run their own business. On the other hand, they've got this, well, very average need for autonomy. So we discussed it, and they said, well, the reason we've come to do our MBA is because we want to grow our businesses. We realize that we don't want to be on our own. We don't want to be sole traders. We want to start to manage people because that's the only way that we can grow the business. And we want to learn how to be managers. And it suddenly dawned on me, of course, that to be a manager, you have to lose that strong need for independence. You've got to be more of a team player. Yeah? And I suggest to you that that is probably the reason you scored low on that. And if all of the other things indicate that you're entrepreneurial, then you actually are quite entrepreneurial. Have you actually thought of setting up your own business at some point?
Yes, I have a few patents, and every time that I have one, I'm tempted, rather than licensing the IP, I'm tempted to move on with the IP and start the company myself.
Now, one of the things about this test, two things about this test. First of all, it's not about any single character trait. I mean, an athlete has a very strong need for achievement. I mean, that drives them on. That's why they want to win. But it's the combination of all of the 5 elements in this test together. You've got to have them all there. And these elements can change over time. There typically are 2 spikes in the time that people set up their own business. One is around the age of 20 and another is around the age of 40. And they're all spikes because your life changes at 20 and 40. At 20, you're moving maybe from university or from home into business. You're more likely to be able to take risks because you've got nothing to lose. At the age of 40, families have grown up, children have left, you might have paid off your mortgage. By that stage, you might even be divorced, who knows? But again, people are more willing to take risks. They want to change their life and do something different. So you've got these 2 spikes. You've got to have all of the character traits, but you've got 2 spikes because your character does change over time. Would anybody else like to talk about the scores they got? Did anybody think it was not accurate? Quiet. Paul, did you take it?
No, unfortunately, I didn't have time, but I will do this. I will do this for sure.
Not to worry. Not to worry. Now, the other thing about this test is it doesn't tell you you're going to run a successful business. All it tells you is that you're going to be, well, maybe not happy, but the lifestyle of being an entrepreneur suits you. You're not troubled by the risks that you might face, the uncertainty that you might face. You like the challenges, and you like it better when you succeed in meeting those challenges because that satisfies your need for achievement. You enjoy working on your own. You enjoy the element of creativity and innovation that goes with being successful. But it doesn't tell you you're going to be successful. You can have all of these character traits and still make a complete mess of running your own business because you don't have the skills. And I mean, teaching business is generally, it's a very strange thing, isn't it? Because we always talk about theory. But actually, when you get down to it, a lot of the theory that we talk about in business schools comes from the real world. It comes from observing how managers actually do things. And it's not theoretical. There are very few theoretical insights as such. It is observing people, how they behave, observing what behaviors you can match with good outcomes, what behaviors you can match with bad outcomes, success and failure. And that gives us an edge in terms of education. It's worth doing, but it's rarely scientific in that breakthrough sense, in my view. Would anybody disagree? Feel free. Would you? Anybody? No, complete silence. Okay, so where am I? Let me go back to my slides. Paul, have I got the slide up there?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't see. Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay. I can tell you these cartoon characters. I live in the middle of Milton Keynes, and Milton Keynes is a big city, but I live in a house that I'm lucky to have a very large garden that backs onto a small wood that goes to the Grand Union Canal. And on the other side of the Grand Union Canal is based on Simpson. So I thought I'd do a Simpson entrepreneurship lecture. So Simpson characters today. So we talked about the character traits of entrepreneurs, and that element of creativity is involved in finding a business idea. Sorry about this. I'm having a problem with the thing with the PowerPoint slides freezing on me. I'm not certain why. There we go. So, yes, I was talking about creativity and innovation. And of course, entrepreneurs and I just want to briefly talk about this idea of them. What do people understand? What does anybody think thinking outside the box means?
Please write in chat.
Sorry?
No. I talk to our participants.
Okay, if anybody'd like to tell me what they think thinking outside the box means, that would help.
Oh, creative. Young Queen writes creative.
Creative,
yeah.
Well, I think it's a bit more than creative. It's creative. I see creative coming up. Let's just see what I've got here.
Not standard way of thinking, not standard solutions. Unconventional, giving a different approach, perspective, solution to a problem.
Okay. Let me tell you what I think it's about.
In addition to being a wonderful person, Mrs. Hackett was an excellent teacher and a great patriot too. She took the challenge of educating America's youth to heart. Who knew? Maybe one of us would invent a future rocket, crack the code of life, or create innovative products that would change the world. She increased our general math and science curriculum and spent an entire week teaching us about aerodynamics. At the end of the week, she announced,
"We're going to test our knowledge by conducting a paper airplane contest. At the conclusion of the experiment, we will evaluate the winning plane to determine why it has flown the farthest."
We were each given a piece of construction paper. Armed with our newly acquired knowledge, we carefully crafted what we each believed would be the winning plane.
Remember what we learned. The sharper the wings, the less drag. The less drag, the farther your plane will travel.
One by one, my classmates stepped to the line and launched their plans. A few planes barely flew 5 feet, while others traveled surprisingly far. The class was ready to declare a winner when Mrs. Hackett noticed one boy had yet to take his turn.
Come on, Jeff, hurry along.
Everyone waited with great anticipation. And then Jeff revealed his masterpiece. As the crowd began to snicker, Jeff responded accordingly. Stopped. Reality shifted. Jeff's plane had traveled farther than the leading planes had flown. No one knew what to think, not even Mrs. Hackett.
I think that explains thinking outside the box better than I could ever explain it, because it shows you why you do think inside the box. Because we're trained to think inside the box. We're trained to conform. Mrs. Hackett there was conducting a class on tools. He could probably get it further than a paper aeroplane. The lesson here is really quite important because entrepreneurs really are not constrained by convention. They think outside the box because they dare to think differently to you and me, because they are not constrained by what I might call the dominant logic of their society, of their family, of their religion, of whatever cultural group influences them. That's really quite important. But what they have instead is this free thinking, but focused on the objective. What is the best way of getting that piece of paper as far down the corridor as possible? So it's focus again. It's a need for achievement again, but it's thinking outside the box. It's not being constrained by other people's thoughts. And that's the way really successful businesses are made. People thinking outside the box. Easy to say, easy to say. I know it's easy to say. But let's just see if I can get my PowerPoint to work again. Because I'm going to have to go out and back in. We'll try it one more time. Because I believe there are some skills that you can learn that can help you do this. Okay. And if practiced, they help creative. It starts you have ideas, awarenesses, a well of knowledge about how people work. It's very difficult to tell you about. Networking is about getting around, seeing different people, different places, listening to different people, view life. We all view life through different lenses, but networking exposes you to these different lenses. So networking is a core element in these discovery skills. Now, these 5 study American academics did, a 6-year study covering 3,000 US CEOs, where they took those CEOs who were not innovative and contrasted them to 25 well-known entrepreneurial innovators. One of them was Michael Lazaridis, oh, difficult for me to say, and he was the boss of Research in Motion that invented the BlackBerry. Now, his networking took him to, well, basically he just observed that Coke machines could wirelessly tell the distribution center that they needed refilling. And he sort of pondered on this, and he thought, why can't we get some way of communicating wirelessly information as I wander around a room, around a building? And that led to the formation of BlackBerry. Now, there's an important underlying point here. Most people walk through life blind. They don't observe what's going on, really. They've actually got to combine this with this next skill. There we go. He's got to combine this with actually taking the blinkers off and seeing what's actually going on around them. So if you network, you go around, you're exposed to different experiences, but you've actually got to observe what's going on. Now, another of the entrepreneurs involved in this study was Howard Schultz, who's famous for the Starbucks coffee chain. And he went to Italy once, and he loved going to these espresso coffee bars. He loved the romance of the bars. He loved the theatre that they created around a mundane thing of making coffee and drinking coffee. And then he brought it back to the States, and that's how Starbucks was formed. The next skill is questioning. I mean, probably the most important question, the second most important question for educationists is the question why. We encourage students to question, ask why. Why do we do things in certain ways? But actually the most important question is probably the question, why not? Why can we not do it in a different way? And in this case, Peter Thiel and Max Levchin of PayPal fame, they were his role model for this one, his example for this one, because they said, well, why can't money just be transferred between people in some sort of electronic way? Why can't you just somehow attach it to an email, perhaps? And that's what got them thinking about the innovation that we now accept around the world. That's called PayPal. So questioning, why can we not do things a different way? Why do we have to pay money for things? Why can't we do it electronically? And the next one is experimenting. And experimenting is, I mean, well, most of us are lazy. So, you know, many people have great ideas, but they don't do anything about it. First thing about experimenting is having the tenacity to get up and do something about the idea that you've got. But actually, most times you try something, it doesn't work. You need to experiment again and again to get things right. So it's about physically doing something and not being fobbed off when it doesn't work first time. And the model for this one might be Michael Dell. Michael Dell formed Dell Corporation after he started deconstructing various IBM and other makes of computers. And he realized putting them back together again, sourcing the components from different places, he could do all of this for some 30% cheaper than an off-the-shelf computer. And so the Dell Corporation was formed. And that is an important fourth discovery skill: networking, observing, questioning, experimenting. These are all important skills, but probably the most important element in this jigsaw puzzle is the fifth one, connecting. Now, connecting is about trying to take ideas from a completely different situation and applying them to the business problem that you want to solve. So sometimes it happens by design, but it's about connecting a problem and a solution in one context with a problem you've got in the business context that you haven't solved yet. So one of the famous examples is Steve Jobs. And of course, when the first Apple computer was launched, it had an amazing range of fonts that you could use. And maybe a coincidence, but Steve Jobs had studied typography. It was a hobby of his. And the Apple Mac became the signature desktop publishing computer because of that range of typography that it offered. Another example might be back from the UK, James Dyson, who invented Dyson vacuum cleaners. Well, originally the cyclone that is used in that vacuum cleaner came when he observed how the cyclone spun out, separated out paint. He found vacuum cleaners at the time. There was only Hoover really was the major manufacturer. He found them not terribly effective. And he wondered if there was a different way of doing it. And so he came up with this idea of a cyclone vacuum cleaner, which of course Dyson now are very famous for. So discovery skills. And as I said, the big research study was by 3 professors from the US, Professors Dyer, Gregson, and Christensen. And these are not really brand new skills. I mean, these are skills that have been practiced for a long time. And, you know, sometimes you come up with these ideas and people say, ah, yes, I've always known that, but I didn't know I knew it. A friend of mine calls it a glimpse of the blindingly obvious. You knew it all the time, but you didn't know you knew it until I tell it to you. Now, this guy, Henry Ford, again, nearly as important an entrepreneur as Steve Jobs, because he invented, if you like, the mass car market, the mass automobile market. He didn't really invent anything. I mean, he was an automotive engineer. He put cars together himself before the Ford Motor Company came into being. But what really made that a tremendous innovation was the assembly line that put it together. The assembly line had people with relatively low skills doing mundane tasks, putting wheels on the car. I mean, they just put wheels on. They didn't know anything about the engine. They just put wheels on. Another person would put the windscreen on. Knew nothing about wheels or engines, just the windscreen. So people who had relatively low skills and therefore relatively low relatively low wages were doing repetitive tasks. So that assembly line was the thing that allowed him to cut the cost of the motor vehicle. Before then, motor vehicles were bespoke things that only rich people could afford. They would pre-order the motor vehicle, probably put a deposit down. They would go and see it being built. They would choose the color, choose the upholstery. And it would be built, it would be a one-off build with engineers doing all of the work to that single automobile. And the assembly line changed all of that. The interesting thing is, where did he get the idea of that assembly line from? Was he sitting in the bath and he suddenly said, I know, assembly lines, we'll do that. Well, the story goes he didn't. The story goes, and it's well documented, that actually quite a few of his ideas came from networking, observing, questioning, all of my discovery skills, associating. So let me give you some specific examples. The assembly line itself. Henry Ford went to a slaughterhouse in America and he saw animals coming into the slaughterhouse alive and going out as pieces of meat. He saw them coming in, being stunned, being killed, being skinned, being cut up. What he saw was an animal being disassembled and coming out as cuts of meat for customers to buy. He turned that on its head and he said, if they can do that with an animal, why can't I do that with my objective to make a cheap car? Why can't I assemble it bit by bit? So that's where that basic idea comes from. But there's a lot more than that. Because, I mean, one of the problems is people doing repetitive tasks get bored. And of course, an assembly line really can only produce cars economically if it's at a certain speed. So how do you get that assembly line to operate quickly? What motivates people on that assembly line doing very basic tasks, very repetitive tasks, to work more quickly than they might otherwise? Well, again, he came up with the idea of sharing profits with the workers. And he got that idea from the hot metal printing works that he visited in France. And there's a few of these coming along. I mean, you probably know one of the useless pieces of information you might get from tonight's webinar is that the fastest drying paint color is in fact black. It dries faster than any other paint color. Now, the original Model T Ford could only be purchased in one color and one color only, and of course, that was black. Now, the final element in this jigsaw, well, I say final element, there's quite a few different elements in this jigsaw puzzle. You've got this wonderful assembly line, and cars are coming out at the other end. But do we have customers? I mean, in the past, cars were bespoke pieces of engineering, probably partly paid for in advance, certainly collected when they were finished. People paid when the vehicle was finished, they'd pay for the vehicle, drive away. But here we've got hundreds of vehicles coming off the assembly line. And really, you can't have people coming to collect them in that way. Henry Ford was responsible for the car dealerships that we, until recently with the internet, until recently we were used to using to buy our vehicles. Now, where did he get that idea from? It wasn't an original idea either. It turns out he got that idea, he copied that idea from Singer, the sewing machine. Just before the Model T Ford, the Singer sewing machine was an invention that revolutionized home sewing. And to get the volume of Singer sewing machines out into the public, what they had were dealerships. And all Henry Ford did was copy the Singer sewing machine dealerships. So again, he was reusing ideas, he was observing, he was experimenting, he was questioning, he was networking. Above all, he was connecting ideas from different contexts to the problem that he faced, producing a mass-produced vehicle that would sell to everybody. It ain't rocket science. And actually, I believe if you practice these 5 skills, these 5 discovery skills, you can become more of an entrepreneur. But of course, just like riding a bike, you've got to actually practice them. It's no good just reading about them. So, oh, one other thing, yes. You might have noticed the visual, the PowerPoint just changed. Henry Ford is famous for saying that if he'd asked customers what they'd wanted, they'd have said faster horses, not cheaper cars. Now, Steve Jobs similarly never trusted focus groups or market research. And the reason both of these characters don't trust market research is because people can't envision the future in the way that these two people could. They have a view of what is possible that other people do not think is possible. They do not believe in fate. They do not believe in destiny. They believe that they can control and influence that fate, that destiny. So Henry Ford said, if I'd asked customers what they'd have wanted, they'd have said faster horses, and I wouldn't have produced the Model T Ford. So just a little lesson there about the problems of trying to do market research if you've got really quite a radical innovation. Okay. Paul. I'm just pausing at this point, Paul, because I realize I'm already 5 minutes over my allotted time.
No, actually, we have 1.5 hours for the lecture, so.
Okay, right. Let's talk about the discovery skills then first. What do you think of those skills? Do you think those are skills that you can practice? Do you think they are useful?
Please write in chat.
Christina.
I talked to our participants for. Whoa, I'm sorry, Paul, help me, please.
I think Paul is asking you, what do you think about
no,
these skills we practiced?
Yeah, I've heard, but I answered that I talked to our participants for writing in chat. What do they think? Vladislav answered that you are right.
So I think Vladislav means that all the skills can be practiced.
Yeah, it can be practiced. Larissa, sure, 100%. Yeah.
So I've also, if you're interested, I've got these 3 American professors. I got one of them who's been kind enough to give us an interview to talk about these discovery skills. Would you like to see it? Yeah? Okay, let's see if I can share this screen with you.
Rosa wrote, but if you don't have the drive.
Welcome to the HBR IdeaCast from Harvard Business Review. I'm Sarah Green. I'm here today with Jeff Dyer, whose latest book is The Innovator's DNA, co-authored with Hal Gregerson and Clay Christensen. Jeff, thanks so much for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
In the book, you talk about the 5 skills of disruptive innovators. How did you settle on these 5 skills? What are these 5 skills?
Well, we started about 10 years ago trying to figure out where do disruptive business ideas come from. And we decided the best way to figure it out was let's go study business innovators and figure out exactly where and when they came up with these disruptive business ideas. So we talked to dozens of innovators, and we found that one group of them were often asking questions. They were questioners, and they wanted to know a variety of things about a problem, an industry, a company. So for example, at Peter Thiel and Max Levchin at PayPal were asking, how can we beam money to other people? And this led for them to come up with the idea that maybe they could attach money to an email, and this led to the emergence of PayPal. Others were observers. For example, Howard Schultz took a trip to Italy. He began observing espresso bars. He loved the romance, the coffee, and he said, I got to take this back to America. He adapted it, brought it back, and here we have Starbucks. Others were networkers. Mike Lazaridis, who started Research in Motion, maker of the BlackBerry, was listening to a fellow talk about how Coke machines could wirelessly tell the distribution center, I'm out of Coke, and I need to be refilled. And he thought, wouldn't it be cool if everybody had like an interactive pager device that could wirelessly send information to others that they wanted to send it to? So networking was the catalyst for the new innovation in the idea. And finally, others were experimenters. So Michael Dell was an experimenter, taking things apart, putting them back together, especially computers during his high school days. And what he learned as a part of taking them apart and souping them up and putting them back together is he could do it for 30% less than IBM could provide an off-the-shelf computer. And so, the Dell Direct model was born. So those 4 behaviors, questioning, observing, networking, and experimenting, were behaviors that triggered associational thinking. This is a cognitive skill where we're able to sort of connect new things together to create something new. So for example, when Steve Jobs attended some calligraphy classes and learned about sort of beautiful typography, He then took those ideas and associated them with creating great typography on a computer, and voila, we had the Macintosh and desktop publishing. So these are behaviors that actually trigger creative ideas, and we found that those behaviors, if mastered, can help anyone to improve their creativity and their ability to be innovative.
Well, let's just take one of those, say experimenting. Okay. How would I go about improving my ability to be an experimenter?
That's a good question. What we learned actually is that there are 3 different ways that people experiment. So I talked about Michael Dell. One of the ways he was an experimenter was taking things apart and putting them back together. So one way to be a good experimenter is to practice taking apart products, taking apart processes or ideas and concepts, and then try and putting them back together to see what you learn. And so if you could, on a regular basis, take apart a product, could be your company's product, competitor's product, could be processes, again, your company or other companies, and try and put them back together, that might trigger new ideas for you about how to do the product or process better. A second way to experiment is just the classic way we think about experimenting, which is testing an idea in the marketplace and seeing if it works. Thomas Edison is sort of famously quoted as having said, I haven't failed, I just found 10,000 ways that don't work, right? Because he just continues to try new things and test the ideas and see what he learns. So in our interviews, the innovators often said, I launch a pilot, I run the experiment, let's try it and see what happens. So it would be regularly trying to pilot something or test something and to see how it works and to see what you can learn. And the third way of experimenting is simply being an explorer. Visiting new countries, companies, environments, learning a new skill like Steve Jobs did when he learned calligraphy and then brought that to the Macintosh computer. So just trying on new experiences, trying out new things, not even testing ideas, that's another way that you can sort of experiment and then bring that knowledge as you try and creatively problem solve.
So if you wanted to sort of help your team master some of these skills, how could you go about encouraging them to do so when they may feel they're already very busy with their real jobs?
Sure. Well, at first it may feel like this is extra work. But let's face it, if your company doesn't do anything new or different in the next 10 years, 10 years from now, you'll be way behind. You've got to do new things. So the first step is you got to create a culture and a set of processes that encourage people to question, that encourage them to challenge the status quo, and to legitimize that that's okay here in our team or in our organization. Second, you got to create some processes and time for them to go observe, whether it's observing customers, whether it's observing other companies. For example, Google and Procter & Gamble actually organized employee swap. For about 2 months, their marketing and HR employees just went and lived at the other organization to see how they did things. And then they brought those ideas back to their company. But you got to make time for observing if you want your team to be innovative. Of course, networking is another thing you can do, giving them opportunities to go to conferences, bringing in people from the outside, maybe a weekly lunch where you bring in someone that has a different background and knowledge to talk to your group, to give their perspective on your problems and challenges would be another way you could sort of build networking skills in your team. And finally, of course, experimenting, it's run the experiment, launch the pilot, let's be willing to try new things, let's see what we learn, not having a culture of we're not going to try things because we might fail is really important to helping your team be innovative.
Well, that's a good place to start. I know there's a lot more in the book. Jeff, thanks so much for talking to us.
Okay, let me come back. Let me stop that share. So that, I hope you found that interesting. It touched on another issue actually, and that is, can these skills be used in a big company as opposed to a startup? And the answer, of course, is very much that they can. I mean, I spend quite a bit of my time working with bigger companies, trying to help them become more entrepreneurial, which is difficult because they're more bureaucratic. Inevitably, as companies grow, they do become more bureaucratic. They have got to safeguard existing operations, existing product services. They're less receptive to new ideas. There is more of a dominant logic, a way of thinking about things. That means it's difficult for them to think outside the box. And the culture in the organization does tend to have to be changed to get them to accept different ways of doing things, different and new ideas. So these discovery skills are serious skills that are transferable skills, but they don't just apply to the individual entrepreneur. I do believe they can actually be encouraged within a big organization. So, any questions about them?
Dear friends, if you have any questions to Paul, please write in the chat.
Oh, нет.
Sorry, guys, we hear you speaking. Can you please turn off
Your microphone.
microphone? Yeah.
Hello?
Guys, you can write down your questions, so you can ask them directly. Just turn off your mic and ask the question.
Don't be shy.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just draw it a little bit to an end. For me, a big challenge is trying to get entrepreneurial skills into a big organization. It's far easier with an entrepreneur on their own or with small teams. It's far easier to develop a culture, an organizational architecture that encourages entrepreneurship. But in a big company, it is difficult, very difficult. But I like challenges as well. Let me just draw my session to a close.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk very briefly about how I think entrepreneurs manage, because I do think that they manage in a different way to big company management. They manage based on relationships. And by that, I mean, somehow they form relational contracts with their employees. And that's a bit like a family. A family has relational contracts. I care for you if you care for me, sort of thing. There's got to be something in it for both parties. And that develops into big networks. It's a spreading set of relationships. And that breeds a whole world of benefits: loyalty, commitment, enthusiasm. It also generates information about what's happening in terms of the marketplace, the threats, the opportunities out there, information about where partnerships might be developed. So fundamental to how entrepreneurs manage is that they manage by relationships. They don't manage by memos, they don't manage by email, they manage by walkabout, by seeing people, to talking to people, forming relationships with people. So I'm having problems again, whoops. I'm having problems with my okay. I'm having problems with my PowerPoint presentation. I hope, Paul, can you see?
Yeah, you can relaunch it if you wish. So. In the meantime, we have one more question from Irina. So what can you say about the conditions of the development of entrepreneurship in Ukraine?
Well, as I was saying to Paul, I was in the Ukraine 25 years ago. It was a very different Ukraine to how I think it is now. I think I need to come out there and see it, is the quick answer. I am certain it has changed for the better. When I was out there 25 years ago, there was not a lot of entrepreneurship going on. It was just when Ukraine had just been formed, and it was the fall of the USSR. So it was a different world to the way it is now. Okay, let's see if it's working. No, it's still not working. Let's pause on this slide. the next element in this jigsaw puzzle is their approach to risk. As we said before, that they are willing to take risk more than individual people. They're willing to live with uncertainty. But this element of information that we get from their networks actually feeds into their approach to risk management, because what they do is take incremental steps. They don't do the big discounted cash flow analysis, you know, go, no go, boom or bust sort of decision. Incremental steps, small steps, each time finding out more about the uncertain environment that they are living in, and each time betting a certain amount on the outcome. So they'll invest small amounts, affordable losses, losses that they can afford if the information comes back, this business idea doesn't work. So this idea of affordable loss, this incremental decision-making, feeds into how they approach the whole area of risk management. And then finally, they do have a vision of what they want to achieve. I don't think that vision comes to them when they set up the business. I think it evolves. And certainly the vision isn't something that big companies would identify with, because often the vision seems unachievable. It's like wanting to go from A to B, but there's a roadblock in the middle. So they've got to find a way around the roadblock. So all the time they say, well, we want to get from A to B, but we're not quite certain how we're going to get there. And that feeds into this incremental decision-making all the time. Each time they're moving their way around this roadblock, they're strategizing, they're thinking about how they might get around it and what they might do when they get around it. And of course, sometimes the roadblock shifts, it moves. So all the time when they're thinking of what they're going to do, they're creating options, strategic options. If this happens, then I'll do that. So this almost spider-like approach to decision-making, bit by bit, little by little, as more information comes along, gained from their networks of relationships, that tends to be how they manage. So what I found all those years ago when I was exposed to entrepreneurs was they were really exciting people. They were personable people. The accountants that I met in big companies and indeed in the accounting firm, they tended to be grey-suited people who tended to work by the rules more and weren't that interested in relationships. They were more interested in command and control, tell me what to do and do it efficiently. So it is a bit more like playing in a jazz band. In a small business, in an entrepreneurial business, you've got people who are going to be improvising in the band. People who are going to be playing along, taking the lead at different points, but they're all moving towards a certain goal. They know where they're going. They're not quite certain how they're going to get there. So a jazz band is a good analysis, a good analogy, I should say, of what an entrepreneur does. So I'd just like to thank my cast of characters from The Simpsons who've helped me through this presentation. And take down the slide so that I can say, finally, are there any questions?
Guys, please shoot your questions into chat or directly to Paul.
Can you, I've got a question. Can I send the presentation? Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
I can do that with pleasure.
Oh, that's great.
It's a lot better when it works unprompted. I've got to tell you, I've got two versions of that talk. And I have a serious version, which, you know, proper academic jacket and collar and tie on, but it's a bit boring. So I thought I'd experiment with something which I think is a little bit more lively, but I just sort of developed, you know, in lockdown, you don't have a lot to do you? So I'm playing with my PowerPoint, one of the things I'm doing. And I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, we have. Paul, we would like to thank you for your time. we have here, as Paul has introduced, we have two groups of business incubators, and in total we have how many universities?
6 universities.
And we are very grateful for all of you that have found the time to join in these strange times and to think in entrepreneurships. Paul, do you think this hardship that we are having worldwide is going to affect in creating new companies?
Well, that's a very good question, but there are better minds than mine who really don't know what is going to happen in 6 months, 12 months' time. I observe a number of things, and on the one hand, I observe how big companies are making people redundant. I observe how some firms, small firms, are going out of business. But I also observe how some small firms are changing their business model very quickly to make the most of opportunities. I observe how some small firms are not just surviving, but actually making more money out of the current situation because new opportunities are coming along. And they're better able to capitalize on those new opportunities than bigger companies. But, you know, things are not going to be the same well, I don't think things are going to be the same, even if they find some way of limiting the extent of this virus with inoculation or whatever. Many industries are going to suffer, tourism, the obvious one. So entrepreneurs are going to have to find new opportunities. But at the same time, those opportunities may be diminished in number. Sorry, I can't be more.
We have several questions, Paul. The first one is from GP. How can small business afford to improvise?
Improvise? What do you mean by improvise?
I think it's experimenting.
Oh, experiment. How can you afford not to experiment?
Improvisation.
Okay, understood. The question I throw back is, how can you afford not to experiment? If you don't experiment, you never try anything different. If you're not trying anything different, you'll never change. If you don't change, you'll die. Ooh, that was strong words.
The next one is from Alexander. I have a question. Can you name the few Ukrainian managers who have creative skills like Steve Jobs? I think
no is the answer. I've written quite a few books, and one of the nice things people have said about my books is that I've got a range of entrepreneurs from different countries. You know, if you buy an American book, Americans only think, well, they don't believe the world exists outside of America, and it's all about Americans. I do not have, however, a case study, a nice little case vignette on a Ukrainian entrepreneur. And if anybody would like to send me one for my next book, I would very much appreciate it.
Okay, we will search for such an
example.
example.
Are requirements for... Sorry. The question from Larissa, are requirements for business in Ukraine similar to those in Europe?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
I think no. We have completely different requirements.
Yeah. No, of course they're not. You've got very different requirements indeed, I'm certain. And a different culture, a different society. But I will bet you anything that there are just as many, if not more, business opportunities in the Ukraine as any other country in the world. I mean, most people, as I said, they go through life, well, many people go through life blind. Most people go through blinkered. But what I've been trying to tell you about is these discovery skills, which make you aware of what's going on. And if you practice those discovery skills, there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of business opportunities in Ukraine. I'm certain, absolutely certain.
I think maybe Larissa means that requirements not for doing business, but for a mindset, entrepreneurial mindset, maybe. The requirements for entrepreneurial mindset.
Well, yes, it's the entrepreneurial mindset is partly set by the society that you're in. So different countries do have national cultures which are identifiably different to each other. And one of those elements is in a number of countries, for example, people will do what they're told. They regard authority as authority. Whereas in the West, we don't. I mean, we like to question, we like, if somebody says do something, you want to try running a business school, I tell you, with my academics, and Jan will support me in this, you tell an entrepreneur, you tell a business school academic to do something, they'll do the opposite. That's quite a Western trait, trying to be different, not regarding authority as authority. But other countries do, and that inhibits this questioning. It inhibits the need for independence. It inhibits well, it creates an external locus of control. Go back to the character traits. It makes people believe that somebody can and does dictate their future. And that is quite a fundamental difference for entrepreneurs. I've done a lot of work out in the Oman, and in the Middle East, of course, they have a problem, which is a high reliance on oil and gas income. And of course, most of those countries are aware that their entrepreneurial base is quite narrow, very narrow indeed. So the Omani government are trying to encourage entrepreneurship. They're very aware that their whole culture is based upon a low internal locus of control, effectively, because it's about the culture, not just of the country, but also to some extent the religion of the culture, religion of the country. And they want to push that in the direction to make people more entrepreneurial. And that isn't a quick thing to do. That isn't something that can be done overnight. But I have done a lot of work over there, and they are succeeding slowly in changing the culture of that nation.
Thank you. We have a question from Arturas. When do you think entrepreneurship roots take place? In childhood? If yes, what we should teach our children?
Okay, so before I answer that question, I don't know how Dmitro Dubilet is, but I'd love to know more about him. If somebody could send me the details. Yes, because somebody's posted that they think he's the best entrepreneur in the Ukraine. If you send me details, like a small case study on him, I will do so. Childhood, yes, childhood's very important, but it's only part of what makes you who you are. I have 3 boys, and the 3 boys are so very different in character. You know, they're brought up in the same family, but the character that they have, they're now in their 30s, derives from their family, it derives from the school they went to, the universities they went to, the work they've done, the friends they've had, the religion, well, they're not religious, but the culture that you have derives from so many different sources, not just childhood. So there's another element to your question, I think. And I would believe that all of those things form the mindset. They influence the character of the entrepreneur. Some people would say, and I'm not one of them, but I've got to respect what they think, that people are born with certain character traits. Somehow their brain is wired up so that they have these character traits hardwired into them. To some extent, that may be true. I've yet to see some evidence of that, but I'm not an expert in cognitive theory. I do believe there is a lot of evidence that you can influence how people become through a whole host of cultural groupings that they work through, including parents. But, you know, just a silly example, just because a child turns out to be, I don't know, a murderer or something like that, doesn't mean they've taken that trait from their parents, my childhood somehow. Not, well, not always anyway.
Thank you.
Okay.
So,
and Dmitro is getting a lot of positives here, but I'd love to know who he is.
Yeah, he's the creator of the first online banking in Ukraine.
Ah, okay.
It's a bank in your cell phone, in your smartphone. So you can send money, receive money. And it's connected to your bank account.
Right.
And now he with his team has ambitions, plans to share this idea to the United Kingdom. Do you know? They have, I don't remember, I think like cats or pots or something like this, like cat, but not really. Like Koto Bank, I think.
So I'd love somebody, please send me some more information about it.
Okay.
Okay, Paul, I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions?
I have a question, a small question. He's also from a minister, huh? I have a question. We have two words, and can you clarify what's the difference between mindset and skill set? Because I read some articles about entrepreneurial mindset and some about entrepreneurial skill sets, and what does it mean? What's the difference between these words, between these terms?
Well, skill set is normally physical, the things that you can do, although of course some of the things that you do, you've learned how to do them. Mindset are your cognitive facilities. Mindset is, if you like, how you think, not what you think, but how you think. So, right, if I can learn how to be a carpenter or a plumber, I can learn how to be a plumber. So I have a skill set that enables me to do plumbing jobs. But my mindset is something about how, it might be how receptive I am to new ideas, for example.
Okay, but if we talk about creativity, is it a skill?
Is creativity a skill?
Yeah.
That depends. This doesn't sound like an answer, but it depends. It's what academics say, it depends. I'm not going to answer the question. I know I'd make a good politician. It depends. If I'm creating a sculpture or a painting, that is partly a skill set.
Oh, I can't.
Creating something, but it's also partly my creativity, which is a cognitive skill. Does that answer the question?
Very difficult question. Yeah, yeah, very difficult. I agree.
So skill set I guess one way of looking at it is if you apply a set of cognitive skills to a practical situation, they can become a skill set.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Maybe the last one from me. So, Paul, can you please tell us, if you had such a chance one more time, would you try run your own business once again?
In Ukraine.
I'm also reading that this entrepreneur was also a former minister, so there's a lot going on there, I think. No, answer your question, no, I hated it, absolutely hated it. And I'll tell you what decided me finally to quit, to stop doing it. We had a couple of very big contracts. Indeed, I mentioned it, I was going out to the Ukraine virtually every month at one point. And we had a dozen people going out. And I was asked by the British government to go out there with a week's notice. Big contract, hundreds of thousands of pounds. It was spread over a couple of years. But they said, just get some people out there. We need somebody on the ground as quickly as possible. And we were happy to oblige doing that without a contract. Now, I don't know if any of you have worked for governments before. Trying to get paperwork through a government takes forever. We were also at the time working for one of the big banks in the UK, developing some teaching materials on a computer. So it was digital learning materials. Now that business, that contract wasn't going well because the original work that we're doing, just the original stuff didn't work to start with. And you know, I was intelligent enough to set a contract which was paid by stages. When we got certain things running, we get a stage payment. So we planned that we get stage payments over a 6-month period before final completion. We got 3 or 4 months into this and the whole thing wasn't working. So the cash flow was non-existent. And of course, meantime, this big contract with the British government, well, they weren't getting the contract out to us. And of course, they wouldn't pay without a contract because, well, they're government, they're bureaucratic. So they were telling us, you've got to get people out there all the time. You've got to have people out there all the time, but we ain't going to pay you any money. So we got to a point a few months into both of these contracts, and business was heavily in overdraft at this point. And, you know, I'd given personal guarantees with my house, so forth. I was waking up at 3 in the morning thinking, oh my God, what happens if government doesn't pay, if the bank doesn't pay, and these things go wrong, I'll lose that. I didn't like that at all. I couldn't sleep. I hated it. Now, both contracts turned out fine. I mean, the government paid up. Of course they would. Eventually they signed the contract. And then, you know, after 6 months, £500,000 sort of tumbled into a bank account. Whew. But, you know, the last person to get paid every month is the owner. Everybody else expects to get a paycheck. Over that period of time, I wasn't getting anything. And my bank account, well, the company's bank account, which I was underpinning, was non-existent. I mean, it was in negative by big numbers. So it was quite a stressful thing. And that decided me that I just did not enjoy doing this. And the interesting thing, perhaps, is when I take that test that you've all taken, my risk profile is negative. I hate risk, right? I absolutely loathe it. And maybe that comes from being an accountant. Maybe it comes from my childhood, but it's actually been completely reinforced by that period of 5 years, which I spent running my own business. So there were nice things about running my own business. I had a nice big car, all of that sort of thing. Lots of nice trips to the Ukraine, but I did not like it because I am basically risk averse.
Thank you. I completely agree with you. I hate risk as well. And we have the last question. What does the expression pay yourself first mean?
Pay yourself first?
Pay yourself first.
I don't know. I haven't heard that expression. Pay yourself. No idea. So that's from admin to everyone.
Yeah, Paul, at the beginning you have mentioned that you were paying everybody else and you were the last one to be paid. And I think admin refers to this. Why not to change, you pay yourself first and then the rest later?
Because the money wasn't in the company. It wasn't there. So, you know, paying myself was not sensible because it was an overdraft the company would have. The company would then rack up charges. So, you know, ultimately, if we didn't get the money into the company, I would have lost out. So that's why I didn't pay myself first.
We have a discussion in the chat about this expression. It's from the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Yeah. Initially, you give away, and then you're capable to get something. Okay.
I mean, entrepreneurs don't like exposing themselves to risk, really, and they don't like giving collateral. And there's many ways that you can minimize the risk that you face. One of the ways they do it, as we saw in that last slide, is by making incremental decisions. So you take decisions step by step by step, each time getting more information about the uncertain future. And that is a typical way they do things. But there are some, and each time investing only a certain amount, so that if you lose it, you can afford it. I mean, with me, I'm not certain how much I could afford. I probably could have afforded it, but I certainly didn't like doing that. But that's what they do. The other way a lot of them do it is, and I've seen this so many times, is they set up separate companies. So each, I'll tell you a true story. Somebody that I know very well set up a pub, and it was a pub that brewed its own beer, but he wasn't certain it was going to work. So the next time he set up a pub that brewed his own beer, he set it up as a separate limited company, right? And he ended up with a dozen of these companies. When I talked to him about this, I said, why have you done this? Because this is not a sensible way to structure your company, your organization. And he said, well, Paul, I always thought every pub brewery would fail. So I just set it up as a separate limited company so that I shielded one pub brewery from the other. There's another technique. There's loads of techniques like that that entrepreneurs use to avoid risk.
Thank you. So, do you have any questions? Dear friends, I want to, many thanks. I agree. Oh, thank you, Yan-Mei, but it's our joint initiative with Paul, our Ukrainian Paul. So, dear friends, we are going to have two another webinars with Paul Burns, yeah, next week for teachers, and on the 4th of June, yeah, for for students, yeah, and young entrepreneurs. So we invite you to all of those webinars, except that webinars we are going to have some webinars from unfortunately without Paul Burns, but if you want to participate like a guest, we will be grateful for you. So
if anybody has any things that they'd like me to talk about in June, well, I think Paul is probably is it yourself, Christina, or is it Paul? They should let know, and then I'm happy to try to accommodate that in my talk, which will probably be a more serious one, therefore. But if there's any topics they want me to talk about, please let either Paul or Christina know.
Okay, but I enjoyed your webinar so much. I can't say. I'm sorry, my English too bad to say how grateful I am for you. It was very interesting. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
The materials from the conference, Telegram or mail, asks Alexander, we will send you by mail. Many thanks, Paul. Everyone is welcome. Oh, many thanks. Many thanks for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paul. Yeah.
I enjoyed this webinar so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.
My pleasure.
Useful and interesting.
Okay. Thank you for everyone. Hope to see everyone again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Paul, should I turn off or stay online?
Oh, you can turn off. Thank you so much. You spent almost 2 hours or even more.
Okay.
So thank you. Let's keep in touch. See you in June.
Send me information about this guy.
Dmitro Dubilet.
I'll send you the PowerPoint display.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all. Pasta